So I spent most of yesterday asleep. Well, a lot of it anyway. Nothing to do with the election. There was a family do the night before and we didn't get to bed till very late. And then I thought, should I bother making a video about the elections? Because, well, after all, there must be dozens of them being made right now, maybe hundreds. I subscribed to Sargon and I saw he'd sent something, it came into my mailbox. And judging from the vicious cartoon of Theresa May, I'm assuming that it must have been about 30 minutes of concentrated fury. And I'm just trying to build up the courage to see it. I haven't seen it yet. So, because I know there are going to be a lot of people talking about the political ramifications, I'm not going to bother with that. Instead, I thought, just to soothe everyone down, I'm going to read a story. So here you are. Yeah, there we are. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I shall begin. Once upon a time, there were two families who lived next door to each other. One house, called the Limes, was owned by Mr. and Mrs. Thomas. The other, Mon Repos, was owned by the Almond family. Since the Thomases and the Almonds both had children of about the same age, years ago they had decided to take the fence down between their back gardens. That way, the kids could play together and share the garden toys. The Almonds, for instance, had a lovely big swing, while the Thomases had the sandpit. This situation worked very well. Occasionally, there were the usual sort of little misunderstandings common between neighbours, but generally it worked well, until the Thomases started to feel a little bit taken advantage of. They were supposed to share the garden duties, but Mr. Thomas was starting to feel that he was doing most of the grass cutting. Now, I'm not saying he was or he wasn't. I'm just saying that's how he felt about it. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas were also starting to get concerned about the parties the Almonds were holding. You see, the Thomases' family lived in other towns at quite some distance, but the Almonds had quite a bit of family in the same road and kept holding parties which tended to be noisy, and often some of the more unruly relatives would wander into the Thomases' part of the garden late at night. Finally, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas decided that the fence had to go back. The kids were mostly grown anyway by this time, so it didn't seem to be too much of a problem. And that was why they were taken aback by the reaction of their teenage kids when they told them about the proposed rebuilding of the garden fence. The kids went ballistic. "I won't be able to play football with Peter anymore," complained George. "And I can't just go round to Joan to do homework with her," fumed Margaret. Sorry, I wasn't reading that properly. "Of course you can," reassured Mr. Thomas. "You just go round to the front door. They're not going to stop you." "It isn't the same," wailed the kids. Margaret banged her coffee cup down so hard that she broke the handle off, and George slammed out of the room on his way back, hitting the door so hard that one of the hinges came right out. Both went to their rooms and sulked for weeks and weeks. "They'll come round," Mr. and Mrs. Thomas said to each other, and they went to the DIY store and bought the fence panels and started to dig the trench for the foundations. They planned to make a good fence that would look smart and wouldn't blow down in the wind. So instead of the quick metal pin system, that's sort like a sort of metal cradle and you just jam it into the ground, instead of that they decided on concrete foundations for the posts. The kids refused to help, and it was hard work for them both, but they accomplished it over the weekend and the posts went in. All appeared well, but the kids were still angry. And despite the fact that they knew it would make the fence less stable, possibly dangerously, they came out again in the middle of the night and poured buckets and buckets of water over the fresh cement. When Mr. and Mrs. Thomas came down the next day, the cement was still soft and the posts were leaning a little, and the fence would never be as straight as it should have been. The panels would therefore never meet properly, and they would need constant refitting. Oh, how the kids smirked when they saw their parents' horrified faces. Down the line, when they needed more pocket money, they would be quite upset to discover that it had been spent on maintaining the wonky fence. But that would come later. For the time being, George and Margaret were feeling quite pleased with themselves. Their parents were feeling a little betrayed. Kids, huh? Who'd have a